Okay, 3 of the big 5 down. Let's get on to Toho's Wildcard, Rodan, or he was originally known, Rodan. They changed in the West because they thought we'd confuse it with the name of the element. Much like Mothra, he is actually the only one of the big 5 to originate from his own movies before being subsumed by the Godzilla continuity. Unfortunately, he never really reached the same heights as his colossal kaiju-sized co-stars. Ghidorah has gone down as Godzilla's principal arch-rival. Mechagodzilla is the ironclad imitation of the King of the Monsters himself, Mothra being the star of her own movies before being subsumed by the Godzilla series, but went on to regain that status with the rebirth of Mothra trilogy, and being Godzilla's most difficult opponent to overcome and one of his strongest allies throughout the various continuities, despite that part of being the ally being actually far more in line with Rodan himself. And Godzilla is, well, he's Godzilla, the world's most famous kaiju. It's kind of hard to compete with that. And then there's Rodan, as I like to call him, Toho's Wildcard. Also, preemptive apology if I start flipping between Rodan and Radon. I somewhat times flip them around because I actually watched Godzilla vs. Godzilla 2 early on when I was younger. So he is Rodan and Radon to me, just the names are interchangeable to me. The often overlooked but always pivotal character to Godzilla's history. He was there for many of the biggest and most influential moments throughout the history of the kaiju. A very far cry from his origin as actually a foil to Godzilla in a way. The reason for this is that Godzilla was the embodiment of the distinctly American nuclear threat, with Rodan being himself the Soviet nuclear program's embodiment. You know what that means, right? War the War Red Army theme! Yes, Rodan is a communist. Now, we are violently pro-American here. I'll try to keep the jokes to a minimum. Explains why he was left behind. Sorry, could not resist. Don't forget to subscribe for more, though I probably lost about half of you at this point, so comment below your thoughts and anger at that joke. Or if you liked it. Who knows? We're going to be changing a little things up for this video. Rodan is actually a very big outlier among kaiju. Mothra and King Ghidorah have actually both been very consistent throughout their histories, though Ghidorah was not always as consistent as Mothra. He was always consistently Godzilla's arch-rival, origins and alignments sometimes differing. The same of Mechagodzilla. He's been a hero, a villain, antagonist, protagonist, controlled by aliens, his own independent thinking creature, to literally just a mechanical remote-controlled toy, essentially. Not only has a personality to have in a robot. Okay, other than the Transformers. And then there is Godzilla. While his character has been everything from Japan's nuclear-powered superhero to the world's atomic destroyer, this is generally due to the movie's individual narrative framing. There's times where he was both the antagonist and the protagonist at the same time, such as Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. Then there are movies like GMK, where he is distinctly and strictly the villain, to Godzilla vs. Megalon, where he is the undeniable hero of the story. So where does that leave Rodan? A character whose allegiances can shift on a dime, one minute being enemies, the next allies. Former allies? Well, it seems now we are enemies. Whose side he will be on at the start of the story and whose he will end up on at the end is really anyone's guess. However, above all, he is actually a deeply compassionate character who fights to the very bitter end for what he believes in and for what he cares about, and will ally with whomever he needs to in order to accomplish those ends. With Showa era in the original Radon, there were actually 2 of them. These were actually rather grotesque and terrifying mutant pterosaurs with teeth, sharp beaks, and rather harsh features, which the original one actually hatching from simply a normal pterodactyl egg that had been buried for 200 million years. Yeah, again, kaiju movies were kinda weird. And it was mutated by atomic testing on Mount Azo. Over the course of its destruction, its mate would actually fly over, and shortly after the 2 of them would begin to cause even more destruction. No, the 2 of them. This is getting out of hand. Unfortunately, by the end of the movie, it would seem the twosome would not survive. The JSDF triggered the volcano they called home to erupt, and with the heat of the volcanic eruption, one of them, while trying to fly away, was actually knocked out of the sky and plunged back into the volcano, where it seemingly burnt alive. The other, however, would not live without its mate and dove into the flames to seemingly meet its own end. Does this mean the original Rodan is technically a romance movie? These are thoughts that keep me up at night. Regardless, 8 years later, in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, Rodan turned, with a very new look, smoothed out with less harsh features, and a little bit more of a sillier, goofier look to sort of disguise that much more harsh and aggressive origin. This one also came from Mount Azo. It is not clear within the movie itself what the exact origin of this Rodan specifically is, be it a child of the first two, a surviving member of one of them, possibly one that died and was resurrected much like a phoenix, or if this was a third unknown variant. Though the resurrection thought is somewhat presented by the Venusian princess in the movie, though when she said it was resurrected, it is with somewhat of the same breath that in the original Godzilla it was mentioned about the nukes. If they were continuing to be used, they would resurrect Godzilla. It did not physically resurrect the original Godzilla, simply another one was created. It was more of a metaphorical sense that it would be resurrected. A new one would be created. So again, what is the exact origin of this one? We don't know. So what is this Rodan Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster? There's a bit to suggest it actually is and it actually isn't. We don't really know fully, but during its discussion with Godzilla, it does come on humanity, attack them, and how humanity hates them for, again, just existing, which suggests that it is aware of what happened in the original Rodan. However, it does come with a distinct lack of its nuclear wind breath. This was an ability the original Rodan had that this new Rodan doesn't. So, really who knows whether this is the original or not, and almost doesn't really matter. However, what really does matter is that Godzilla and Rodan just refuse to help Mothra face Ghidorah because of their mutual indifference to humanity. However, despite this, they do eventually relent, and Godzilla coming around first, Rodan does join in later, and the three join forces to take down the space dragon. Later on, in Invasion of Astro Monster, he and Godzilla team up to defeat Ghidorah on Planet X. This time they seem far more willing to actually work together, and almost as if they are friends in a way. They both actually celebrate on the alien world after they drive off the space demon dragon. The two haven't really let go their dislike of humanity, but they also don't seem to really have an issue with facing Ghidorah again, even though they were humanity's unwitting allies here. You know, it's again, that's kind of why I love the show and movies. They're a bit weird. The two largely keep to themselves on Monster Island afterwards. This partnership actually would evidently seem to have very much reshaped Godzilla's outlook on things, as in many of the future movies, he would go on to ally with many other kaiju, Anguirus, King Caesar, Jet Jaguar, possibly even meaning that this is the reason why Godzilla worked with humanity going forward. Because of Rodan, he was not quite able to let go of his hate of humanity, but was able to live in peace with them, let bygones be bygones. And that despite his relatively few appearances in the Showa era, his last major appearance was more or less a glorified cameo in Destroy All Monsters. His effects were very far-reaching and have shaped Godzilla going up until the modern day. So now that the Showa era set the stage, what would happen to him in the Heisei era? He only had one major appearance throughout the Heisei era, being Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, but this actually did follow much of his original characterization from the original Rodan movie. In this one, he appears as a nestmate of the infant Godzilla Sore egg that both Godzilla and, of course, Rodan himself are seeking to protect, and one that humanity unwittingly actually takes back to mainland Japan, thinking it is a pterosaur egg. In fact, at the start of the movie, the two kaiju actually come to blows over this fact, with Rodan wanting to protect whom he believes is his adoptive brother of sorts, and Godzilla wanting to protect a member of his own kind. Remember, in the Heisei era, Godzilla is psychic, so he could sense what was actually in the egg before it actually hatched. Though first appearing as foes, Rodan later comes back in the movie as Godzilla's ally, being revitalized by the song sung to Junior, converting him into the Fire Radon form, gaining access to the powerful uranium heat beam, which somewhat, I think, calls back to his atomic wind breath. It is actually Rodan who attacks the convoy transporting Junior in order to rescue him, as humanity was planning to use the very young Godzillasaur as bait to trap and kill Godzilla with an ambush using Mechagodzilla. This prompts a scramble launch of Mechagodzilla 2 to take down the giant pterodactyl, who is fatally wounded defending his surrogate brother. And in a final selfless act, he flies over to his former foe Godzilla and gifts him his life force. This heals Godzilla's destroyed secondary brain, which Mechagodzilla 2 destroyed in order to cripple Godzilla, With his second brain healed, Godzilla is able to stand on his own 2 feet, and with the hyper-uranium heat ray, is able to incinerate Mechagodzilla 2, destroying that diamond coating which prevented him from using the plasma grenade, which inflicted that fatal wound on Fire Rodan. Rodan did this because, above all, he wanted to protect his little brother, and saw that only Godzilla was capable of doing that. The Millennium Era didn't really do much for Rodan, unfortunately. We only see him for a few parts of Godzilla Final Wars, and in the entire movie he is actually under the directive of the Exilian Controller. However, it is said by the people making the movie that the monster's origins and backstories are largely that of the prior movies, so we can assume much of Rodan's history is the same as what he was in the Showa era. However, a very notable thing about Godzilla Final Wars is that every other monster in the movie, Godzilla actually kills. There are 3 exceptions to this, however. These being Anguirus, King Caesar, and Rodan himself. Instead, he simply knocks them out and piles them up as he goes on to face other monsters. This is likely to indicate that in Godzilla Final Wars continuity, these were allies of Godzilla. He knew that they were good monsters, and that they were being controlled by the aliens, since these were all classically Godzilla's principal allies. Again, all from the Showa era. With Godzilla's singular point, Rodan is actually not an individual, but rather a flock of them. There's many different variations, from the first form to the second form, which is slightly different, to the giant black Rodan, which is immediately game-ended by Godzilla Terrestris. It's kind of hard to see because there really aren't many good pictures of them. These are the most common kaiju appearing in every single one of the episodes. And they really aren't that much different than kind of normal pteranodons, especially with the size, except for, again, the giant one. Now, MonsterVerse Rodan is a really fun one, and this is where he really does go into being full Wildcard. He takes aspects of really all of the prior incarnations, Fire Rodan thematically, the destructive horror monster nature of the original, and in some ways the companion seeker that is common to almost every single version of him. However, this companion seeker comes with a very dark, grim twist. This Rodan is not really compassionate or caring, but rather almost a conniving and scheming, not necessarily coward, but follower more than anything. He allies with whom he views as the strongest. This is evident when he destroys humanity with the same bloodlust that Ghidorah does while under Ghidorah's thrall. However, prior and after, when Godzilla was the apex titan, he doesn't really seem to go out of his way to destroy humanity. He also does this very elaborate supplication display, almost groveling before the Alpha Titan. He does this both to King Ghidorah as well as Godzilla, fanning his wings out in front of him as he bows. It took just a roar from Godzilla to get him to back down. He might act tough, but Godzilla also seems to be clearly aware of Rodan's shifty allegiances, as he does still possess the wound in his shoulder from Mothra's stinger, and seems to be almost ashamed of his actions. Well, not really ashamed of his actions, but groveling to Godzilla to not get flattened. Despite, again, Godzilla having absolute full reign to flatten him right there, as he did seem to issue somewhat of a challenge to Godzilla before said roar quieted him down. It really could be interesting to see what they do with Rodan in the future. I'd like to see some sort of redemption arc, or maybe he even becomes a future foe. Either way, I do really like this guy, especially his design, especially just how gigantic the wings are. MonsterVerse might have its issues, but the designs certainly are not one of those. But that is Rodan, the terrifying pterodactyl, and first ally of Godzilla. Mothra and Anguirus tend to get a bit of a rep for that, when really Rodan was the first. Though it technically was actually Mothra who did ally with Godzilla first, because she was the one that prompted him. Rodan was actually the much more consistent one. That could be a fun video in the future, actually, going over all of Godzilla's allies and who actually was the most frequent ally of Godzilla, because there could be some wiggle room on there. Mothra was an ally in more movies. Huh, that could be a fun video. But if you guys haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe for more, leave a like on the video, comment your thoughts below, and I will see you in the next one. Do we round out with Mechagodzilla next time, or just really mechas in general? I have no idea. We are literally just making this up as we go.